That's one.
That is one. Go.
Awesome. Jordan, welcome, man. We're excited to have you today.
Hey, you know what? Thank you for being here. We're already having a good time.
Yeah.
We just barely hit the record button. We're having a good time. So I'm looking forward to this a lot. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Speaking of looking forward to it, man, is to be honest, Anthony and I have been very excited to have you on. We've had this on this calendar for a few weeks now. And so we're excited to kind of dive into your background, but also some ways that you might be able to help some of our listeners with in the laundromat space. So, Jordan, with no further ado, man, give us a little bit of background. Share how you kind of ended up in this space.
Yeah. Well, as a small child dreaming about the future, I was dreaming about being a laundromat owner, like
Yeah,
most
right.
small kids.
Quite a vision you had at a young age,
Yeah.
Jordan.
Yeah. No, man, life is weird sometimes, right? Like you look at it and you're like, how did I end up here? This is weird. But yeah, so I mean, if I go back to college, I was studying physics, was really looking forward to being in astrophysics, and
Wow.
got 3 years into my physics degree and ended up sort of happening upon a part-time job as a youth pastor at a church. And pretty much 2 months into that, I was like, dude, this is like the best job ever. I want to do this
Great.
for all of eternity, right?
Yeah.
And so 3 years into a physics degree, I transferred schools and changed majors to study ministry.
Mhm.
And turns out there's not a whole lot of overlap between physics
Really?
and
Yeah.
ministry. So it took me an extra year to graduate. And did ministry. I was a pastor for almost 15 years, doing youth ministry and other stuff too. Yeah, so did that for a little while, and then got to a point in time where I was married. We had 2 young kids, and ministry is great and I love it, but it can be taxing, both on your time, but also you're delving into some of the most intense moments in people's lives a lot, right? A lot of pain, a lot of stress, that stuff that you're really just trying to help, which I love that. But, with a young family and all that stuff, it was pretty taxing on myself and on my wife. So we just decided it was time to kind of transition out. And I was trying to figure out what to do. I have 3 years of physics many years ago, and then a degree in ministry, and then 15 years in ministry. And then what do you do when you don't want to do ministry vocationally anymore? And it was a little bit of an identity crisis, but I had a great idea. And I was like, look, we own our house here in Southern California. Let's rent it out. Let's take our savings, go buy a beach on the condo, a condo on the beach in Hawaii, and do whatever, sell jewelry on the beach or whatever. I don't know, whatever.
Great idea.
Until our kids are school age, and then we can move back if we want to, and net gain condo on the beach in Hawaii. And my wife said we could do that, or we could buy a laundromat. So here I am
Oh,
today.
so it's your wife's idea.
Yeah, which is funny in and of itself, but if you knew my wife, it's way out of character for her. So it is like a weird little turn here in our story.
Now, why did your wife bring up that idea? That's unique.
I asked myself that all the time. No, so if you can follow me here, so my wife's parents, friend's son, basically a family friend, worked a tech job in the San Francisco Bay Area. He was working 80 hours a week, and he ended up buying a laundromat and replacing that income and working 5 to 10 hours a week. And my wife was like, well, why don't we just do that? And I was like, yeah, that sounds good to me. And so that's what we did. It did not turn out that way for us, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit, but that was the concept behind it. Essentially, before we knew anything about Rich Dad, Poor Dad or investing or business ownership, it was like, hey, let's separate our time from our income. And that was sort of the goal. And we learned about all that stuff after the fact, which is probably why things didn't go that well for us initially, partly.
Yeah, well, let's dive into it, man. I'd love to hear kind of how you took that first step. It goes from idea to, family, friends, been successful in doing this. What was your first step into that endeavor?
Yeah, so I had a conversation with that family friend, which was great, and he was helpful. But he bought a good laundromat day one, and so he didn't really learn hard lessons that I was about to learn the hard way. And so it was great and helpful. But like I said, he didn't know a lot of the stuff that we were going to be up against. And so, I took to online. I did as much research as I could, but this was like a decade ago almost now. And so there really wasn't anything online hardly to really help. And I didn't know anybody in the industry, and a lot of people that I reached out to. This industry has just been not as much now, but it's been traditionally very like close-minded. Like, what are you trying to steal my business type of thing?
Mhm.
Like, get out of my laundromat if you ask any questions. And so it was hard to find somebody to help. So I ended up relying mostly on this broker I found online when I was Googling laundromats for sale near me. And he pointed me to a laundromat, and I essentially like relied solely on him. And so, it turns out he didn't have my best interest in mind, but he sold me the dream of, totally, pretty much totally passive income and, making good money. I was supposed to be making $5,000 or $6,000 net a month with this little laundromat, and ended up losing a couple grand a month for a couple years almost.
Mhm.
Oh,
So it was a
that's a
big
big swing.
punch to the gut. Yeah.
So at this point, were you still working in ministry and doing both, or were you
No. Nope. Just jumped in both feet.
okay? All in,
Naive as
love
I
it.
was. It was great.
Yes. It sounds like that wound is fresh, Jordan.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So you're doing that for a couple years, man. How did you handle that? How did you get out of it?
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, it was tough, man. It was it was like kind of a gut check time to, it got to a point maybe like a year or so in. I don't know, it all kinds of blends together these days. It's a little while ago now, but maybe a year or so in where I was like, I've got to make a decision here. Do I cut bait and run and find something else to do? Or, do I take these very expensive, very painful lessons that I'm learning here and try to put them to good use? And my wife was very much the let's cut bait and run. And I was very much like, listen, there's a stat that goes around, right? For
Yeah.
laundromats, 95% of laundromats are successful. And for the life of me, I could not figure out, how am I in the 5% that can't figure this business out? Like, this does not mesh with my identity of myself, right? I can't figure it out. And I was like, I can't end being in that 5% that didn't figure it out, right? And
Mhm.
so partly that, and then partly also, I really honestly, like, if I just was going to get real honest with you guys right now, I also didn't know how to get out. Like, I was losing money. Like, who's going to take over this laundromat now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I also didn't know how to get out. And so kind of stuck with it. And it was one thing that I learned was it was a lot easier to rehab the laundromat than it was to rehab the reputation of the laundromat. And so part of the reason it took so much time is I had put a bunch of new equipment in there and spent, almost like $150,000 of new equipment in it, but I spent $0 on rehabbing the reputation of the laundromat,
Mm.
and it had a bad reputation. We bought what we call in the industry a zombie mat, right? And it was run down, and I'd find needles in there and all kinds of stuff, craziness happening to this
Oh,
laundromat. So, but over time, by running a good business and doing it consistently, people started sort of trickling in, but I didn't really do anything to help it happen any quicker.
Man, that's crazy. So you
Yeah.
buy it, right? You're kind of going through it. How long till it became profitable?
Yeah. Well, real quick before I answer that question, I just want to point out, like, we were talking about, hey, we like this to be, casual, and we'll throw
yeah.
zingers around. And right now I'm feeling like this, like, puppy on the ground where you're like, I can't make fun of this guy. Like, it's so sad. And that's how I
We're-
set it up so that I will win the zinger war.
I,
No.
I like I like I can't kick you while you're down, Jordan.
Yeah.
So I gotta
I
lift you
can.
back
I
up
can.
before I start
Jordan, so
kicking.
watch
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see. Anthony's the heartless one.
Yeah,
here
I
who-
kick him when he's down. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
all the
much
time.
easier to kick him when he's down.
Little baby kicks. I don't even notice them.
I love it.
Jordan, so we're in the low, right? We're at the bottom of this. You got a zombie mat this thing's bad. You're bleeding money, right? You put a bunch of money into it,
Mhm.
man. Start to kind of describe this incline, right? How do you get out of this thing? Is it just over time? What's happening here?
Yeah. So, well, the broker had told me essentially, like, we did essentially no due diligence on this thing because the broker was like, look, it's really just breaking even, and we're putting new equipment in. So here's what you can expect to come in, right? It was a field of dreams business model. If you build it, they
Mhm.
will come.
Mhm.
And it sort of did happen that way. I mean, business kind of doubled when I put new equipment in. However, I found out it wasn't breaking even; it was actually losing money.
Mm.
In the get go, and then I financed new equipment. So then I had, not only was I losing money, but now I got a loan payment. And so even though business doubled, it still was losing a couple grand a month. So the smart thing to do probably would have been to do some marketing, do some promotions, try to get new people in there.
Mhm.
But what happened with me, like, internally, was I'm losing money every single month. I really don't know if marketing is going to work here. There's also
Yep.
this narrative in the industry that laundromats, we don't market, right? And this is changing now, thankfully, in this industry. And I'm really trying to drive home the point, like, this is good for our industry if we market. But the narrative at that point was we don't market, right? And so I was scared to put marketing dollars in. And I'm like, that's more money going out. I don't know if any of it's coming back. And I don't know if I can stomach losing more than I'm already losing, right? So I kind of turtled up. But over time and running consistent business, keeping the place clean, trying to keep the people out that shouldn't be there, and keeping the machines running, all that stuff, and running a good business. Over time, people did kind of trickle in. Word of mouth did sort of sprinkle out, and it just kind of steadily grew. But it did take a couple years until we hit that sort of break even point and move beyond that to profitability. And it never hit. I just sold it last year, actually. It never hit what the broker told me it was gonna hit, and knowing what I know now, like, it was never gonna do that. Even 5 or $6,000, that particular laundromat, it was never gonna do that. But that's what sold me into the business.
Jordan, I I'm curious how that was. So you're talking about how we're losing money for multiple years, and your wife was like, "Hey, let's cut bait."
Mhm,
Talk about that's difficult to manage a losing business, a business losing money, but then you also have a family. How
mhm.
were you guys able to get through that?
By the skin of our teeth, man. I mean, listen, I mean, we can get real here. Like, there were some times in there that were
I got that.
pretty rough, like,
Yeah.
very dark. Because, when you're having business problems, when you're having financial, like, we all know this, right? Like, when you're having problems with your finances and more money's going out than's coming in, it puts stress and strain on all your relationships,
Yeah.
right? And
Uh-huh.
in particular, a marriage, right? And so, for me, I was, we went into this thing like, okay, we're partners on this thing. We're going to make this thing work. Well, pretty quickly after we found out what we walked into, like, my wife she just couldn't handle it anymore. And so I sort of inherited this business, you know,
Mhm.
wholly. And my whole life, like, the idea when buying this business, and this is, I don't want to scare anybody, right? Like, this is why I do what I do now, and this is not everybody's experience. And I want to make sure it's nobody's experience. But for my story, like, the idea was not a whole lot of time with money coming in, and it ended up being a whole lot of time for me and money going out. No money coming in and money going out, right? And so
Mhm.
my whole life was trying to figure this thing out. And anytime we had a conversation about the laundromat, it just didn't go, like, it stressed my wife out completely. And I finally realized, like, we can't talk about this business at all. I just got to handle business. But what it did was it put a gap between us, and our communication, like, just went way down to where we could barely even talk to each other because I was so stressed and frustrated about the business. And if I brought it up, she was all the more stressed, and it was dark, man. It was dark there for a little bit. And it took, that business kind of slowly coming up for us to be able to kind of come back together on that. So it was rough, man.
Dude, I bet. Now looking back, what's a lesson or two that you've taken from that? And I think that's kind of led you into some of the resources you provide now, if I'm right.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, big takeaway for me. It's kind of embarrassing, right? Like these are probably obvious to everybody listening here.
It's just the three of us, Jordan.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
just
it's
the
probably
three of
obvious
us.
to you too and anybody else who might accidentally hear this. Right? Like these lessons, they seem so obvious now, but I was so ignorant. I knew nothing about business. I knew nothing about investing at the time. But like, listen, don't rely on the person who stands to gain from you buying a deal solely, right? Don't rely on them solely. Have somebody who does this is for laundromats, this is for anything, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
somebody who understands what you're trying to invest in or what you're trying to buy, just help you walk through, especially the first one, right? Just have somebody who understands it, walk you through that first one to make sure that you're asking the right questions, you're getting the right information, right? You're looking for the red flags. And, laundromats specifically, they're a cash business, right? We've got a reputation over here of being pretty shady with our finances. And so, verifying income is not easy, right? And so you need somebody who knows what the finances actually should look like and who knows the things that you don't even know that you should know before you buy a laundromat, right? And
Mm.
why invest tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars or more in a business and not have, invest in somebody who can make sure you understand fully what you're getting before you actually close on that deal. So, I mean, a 15-minute conversation with now me back then would have saved me six figures, hands down, easy.
Mm.
Right. So get in with somebody there. And then the other thing too, that I kind of alluded to is when business goes down, I think a lot of our, as like a business owner, a lot of our tendency is to look for places to cut expenses. And one of the first places we typically go to is the marketing side of
Yeah.
thing, right?
Mhm.
And it's the exact kind of wrong thing. That's like the downward spiral right there. And so, that's sort of the other thing is like, don't cut the marketing when you need it the most there.
So what I'm hearing is I heard a couple things there. One is that unfortunately you're part of that 5% for a while, right?
Yeah.
If someone were to go out there and look at buying one of these things, and they want to be part of the 95%, what are some potential gotchas that they should be aware of to avoid?
Yeah. Okay. So like I mentioned, this is a cash business. One good thing is we're finally starting to adopt some new technology here, like digital payment systems, things that everybody else has had for like a
Yeah.
decade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're finally starting to like, okay. But most laundromats still are cash businesses, right? So, the gotchas you really need to be looking for are, obviously if you're trying to sell something, you want it to show as much income coming in as possible and as much expenses going out as possible. And, unfortunately, if an owner, which you will encounter for sure if you look at more than a couple laundromats, uh, tax returns, bank statements, those kind of traditional types of things, they're just not going to be super useful in most cases in terms of verifying income and expenses. So, it comes back down to, having to stack different methods of verification on top of each other to try to get the full picture, right? So you want to do things like a coin count where you go in and actually collect the coins with the owner. You want to try to get access to the camera system if there is one, or put one in if there isn't one during due diligence, right? To just see how many customers are coming in, what they're spending their money on, make sure the owner's not doing anything shady like salting the mines, which is like adding quarters at night. So when you go collect them, it looks like more was in there actually. You got to put on, this is what I say all the time. You got to put on your like inner junior high hat. Like when I was in junior high, I was always like looking for ways to get into trouble. Right. And,
Mhm.
it's like the whole trust but verify, but you got to
Yeah.
like, you know, if I was going to pull one over on me, how would I do it? Right. And things that like looking at utility bills, you got to look at the utility bills because you can see sometimes where income's going up, but then you look at the water bill and you're like, well, there's not more water being used. So how is the income going up? Right. And
Dryers.
there's potential ways it could, like if maybe they raise prices or, but
Mhm. Interesting.
these are the things that you got to be looking at to be able to verify this income and the expenses here.
Jordan, if somebody were to get it started, where do they start? How much money do they need? What resources are available to them?
Yeah. So, okay, the answer to all your questions pretty much is it depends. So we'll
Okay.
just get that out of the way. But I'll try to tell you like what it depends on, right? So there are ways to get into this business with very little money down, right? And that can be an attractive way, right? And there's things like owner financing. Owner financing is sort of like the holy grail of real estate investing, right? Well, it's
Yeah.
actually fairly common in a lot of business acquisitions and especially in laundromats, which is good. But the reason it's fairly common is because so many laundromat owners either have very bad books or no books, or they have very good books. Like maybe they have more than one book, even. You know what I mean? And so that makes it difficult for these to get financed through traditional financing methods. And so seller financing is option. So it's a good thing that option is there a lot of times. It's not as good because sometimes it just means something shady's going on and you got to be able to figure out what it is and, factor all that in. So, how much money do you need? I mean, usually I would say to go the safer route, 50 grand is probably what you're looking at for down payment as a minimum and maybe some operating costs. But a way to sort of back into a number, which is probably, I think, a more useful way to think of it is, laundromats are valued based on their net income, right? And then what we do is we apply a multiple to that net income. Right now in today's market, the multiple is usually somewhere between 4 and 5.5 times the net income there. So, what you can do is sort of take, the number that you're looking for in terms of like cash flow and, apply a multiple to that to sort of get a valuation. And then if you want to go traditional financing options, there's a few different options out there for you. So if you go like a laundromat specific lender, they're looking right now, at least in this market, they're looking for like 40% down, which is higher than normal, but that's just sort of the market we're in right now. There's some SBA options that are 25 or even down to 10% down. And so you can look into those. But those will kind of give you a framework of how much money you need down. And then I would say you probably need some operating costs, above and beyond that. You're going to need things like a down payment for the lease or like a deposit for the lease. Sometimes utility companies have deposits. You might need to buy quarters from the previous owner if it's a quarter store, things like that that are there. So those are some of the things to kind of factor. But if I had to like pinpoint like a minimum down, I'd say shoot for 50 grand. You can do it for less than that. But the further below that you go, the riskier the route is for the laundromat.
How much time and energy does somebody need to expend if they buy one of these things?
Great question. I mean, this is like one of the big draws of laundromats, right? Is like they're pitched as passive. I would not say they're passive. It's a bit, one thing I like to say a lot is like, anytime you're dealing with people or machines, there's going to be problems and you're going to have to deal with them.
Yeah.
And with laundromats, you got a lot of both, right? And so there are issues that come up. There are problems that come up. So I would not call it a passive business. However, kind of depending on the business model, right? If you have a self-serve only laundromat, I mean, you're looking at like 5 to maybe 10 hours a week to put in to run this thing. Maybe you might want to like account for a little bit more than that up front just to kind of get to know the business and, get things running the way you want it. But after everything's running, I mean, I think you're going to have a hard time spending more time than that at the laundromat. But right now, a really good opportunity that's happening in our industry is the service side of the business, right? So whether that's people dropping their laundry off at the laundromat and you processing it or your staff processing it for them, or pickup and delivery, where you have a driver that goes out and drives a route and picks up laundry and brings it back and then delivers it back clean, which is a huge growth opportunity right now in our industry. I think we're scratching the surface and it's going to be booming. but that might
Uh,
require a little more time. That's
yeah.
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. You'd mentioned something there, but how long I don't know how long you held yours for. But typically it sounds like once you get it up and going, you can hold it for a while, right?
Yeah.
Can you hold it indefinitely? How long are people holding on to these things?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are holding them for decades. So to kind of give you like a glimpse, like a typical lease, what we're looking for is like a 20-year lease. So I mean, obviously you can sell it before that. And I'd say a lot of people are holding these things for 5 to 10 years, and then a lot of owners, their goal is to just kind of hold them indefinitely, and maybe they sell when they're ready to retire or whatever. They're just ready to be done with them, but you know, laundromats are a cash flow play, right? If you're looking for equity, I think real estate's a great way to go. You're looking for that kind of long-term generational wealth,
Mhm.
real estate's great. When it comes to cash flow, the average real estate deal can't touch the average laundromat deal when it comes to cash flow, right? And, just to kind of give you context, I mean, you're
Yeah.
looking at a 20 to 25% return on your investment with a laundromat, and that's unleveraged, and that's just for like a base hit deal. And once you apply a loan to that, those returns can go up from there. And so, it there's only a limited number of circumstances where you're like, yeah, I want to give up this cash flowing performing business that takes me 5 to maybe 10 hours a week.
Yeah.
You know,
Jordan, what do you see as some obstacles in the future of owning a laundromat business?
well, I do think the service side of the industry is growing. Well, one trend that we're seeing a lot of is that laundromats have sort of typically been small little community
Mhm.
centers, and there's still a ton of those out there, but a lot of the new stuff that's being built are larger. They have a larger footprint, 5, 6, 7,000 square feet, tons of machines. Used to see all these like little top loader, like 20
Mhm.
top load machines. Now most new laundromats aren't putting those in at all. And the machines are getting bigger and bigger. We've got 80, 100, 120-pound machines, washing machines in there. And so there's this shift, and I don't think the self-serve laundry is ever going to go away. But there's this shift happening from self-serve only to more larger full-service laundry centers, is kind of how I describe them, where the self-serve is still there, but then they're also processing drop off and pick up and delivery laundry out of these places. And those service side is helping to support the salaries of the employees that are there, keeping the place clean and helping customers anyways.
Mhm.
But then also they can be super profitable. So if the goal is to be on the passive end, you can also do that with a full service laundry center. It just might take a little time to get up and running and get the right like manager in place. I've got lots of friends who have big businesses. They've got 5, 6. I've got friends with 40 laundromats, who, they're not working in their laundromats full time, right? They're more on the investor side of things, but you got to have the right technology and the right people in place to do that.
Jordan, is this something that you need to live in the town where you own the laundromat, or is this something that can be done remote?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so traditional advice is, hey, close to home is better. And I think that's still true. Close to home is better, for sure. But new technology is allowing us to operate these things more remotely than ever before, right? But I kind of mentioned, but in order to be able to do it remotely, you've got to have the right technology that you're working with. You probably want like a digital payment system, like a card payment
Yeah.
system, as opposed to coins. But the other factor is you've got to have somebody on the ground that can help you run your business, right? Because it's still a business, even though it can be a very low maintenance business. It's still a business, right? So you've got to have boots on the ground, and you probably don't want minimum wage employees like a laundromat attendant running your business solely for you, right? So you've got to have that next tier up, like a manager in place in order to do that. And so in order to have a manager, you either have to have a really big laundromat that's doing high volume, or you've got to have some sort of scale maybe like 3-ish or more laundromats to be able to afford someone to help you manage that portfolio.
Do you see greater opportunity in the new builds or looking at something that's more established?
I mean, there can be in both. The easier route by far is to buy something existing, even if you're going to, basically gut it and put all new stuff in there and remodel the whole thing. Just the amount of infrastructure that has to go in, the amount of construction costs, those can be very cost prohibitive. There's listen, there's a lot of like ridiculous government fees out there. Like I'm
What?
sure we all know. One of the worst, like most ridiculous ones, in my opinion, is something called an impact fee. And what that is basically just a thumbs up from the government that says you're allowed to connect to the sewer line. It's not a permit to connect to the sewer line. It's not the actual connection, like construction. It's just like we give you permission. And usually they charge that per washing machine. And it varies, the cost varies widely. But to give you an idea of a laundromat we were looking to build here, it's 3,000 square foot space, really great location. The impact fee for that just 3,000 square foot space was going to be $390,000. And
Whoa.
it killed. And that's before buying machines. That's before any construction costs. That's before any permits, any of that stuff. And so obviously that killed that deal. And again, it's not like that everywhere, but those can be cost prohibitive, which is bad. However, it's very good for existing laundromats, right? And it
Yeah.
makes those businesses very stable. So the laundromats in that area are pretty good because not very many people are going to fork
Build another.
over, almost 400 grand just to get started on that. So those, the chances of new competitors coming in is low in that situation.
If somebody's listening to this podcast and they're like, man, this sounds like a good idea, is there a skill set or something that translates well? A background that translates well?
Maybe being a pastor for 15 years.
Yeah. I mean,
Physics for free?
that's the number one route. It might be the only route, really. I don't know. Yeah. So, one thing, if you have a little bit of marketing knowledge, you don't have to be a marketer, but if you have a little bit of marketing knowledge, like that is low hanging fruit in our industry right now. You don't have to have that by any means. And there's starting to be, starting to come into our industry, some marketing companies that understand laundromats and specialize in laundromats. It's brand new in our industry. But if you have even a little bit of marketing skill, that is low hanging fruit because still not very many laundromats are marketing. So that's one thing. But really, you'll hear a lot of people saying, don't buy laundromats because you can't make money unless you fix your own equipment. So you got to be mechanical. That's not true. I mean, you can go that route for sure. And, repairs are, you're paying somebody to do repairs. It's not cheap. It's like, paying somebody to repair an appliance in your house or something. It's not going to be the cheapest thing. But you definitely can still make money. And a lot of that comes from this old mindset that we used to have of like, keep your laundry equipment as long as possible. Take pride in your 30 or 40-year-old equipment. Like literally that was the mindset. And so, yeah, you probably are going to lose money if you've got 40-year-old equipment and you're paying somebody to come in every week to fix it all right. But that mindset is starting to shift now, thankfully, also. And we're taking better care of neighborhoods, which I think is the biggest thing.
Now, Jordan, we were talking about your story, and then we kind of transitioned. The last we left, you were like a wounded puppy.
Yeah.
You mentioned, right?
Yeah.
If you were still a wounded puppy, I don't think you wouldn't be on our podcast.
Right.
So you mind to kind of maybe share, what happened, afterwards?
Yeah. Great question. And I definitely wouldn't be here saying, hey, laundromats are a great business for a lot of people. Right. And I think it should carry a little weight, actually, the fact that I'm saying that, because of my experience getting into it was not a good experience, right? Losing money and having all the pain associated with that. However, as business started to turn around, I started to see what I thought from the beginning, right? Is that laundromats can be a great way to, escape the 9-to-5, achieve financial freedom, right? And, in fact, I think that a lot of people, like I'm I'm a real estate investor. I have real estate, commercial and residential real estate. I love real estate. Actually, probably real estate is my first love when it comes to
Mhm.
investing asset class. However, if your goal is to leave your 9 to 5, if your goal is financial freedom, I actually think you're probably going to be a lot better off buying something like a laundromat before you start buying a bunch of investment real estate. And the reason for that is financial freedom, leaving your 9 to 5, that all requires cash flow. And, if you're getting, for example, 10% return on your investment for real estate. If you got 100 grand, you're making 10 grand off your real estate a year. You could be making 20 to 25 on a base hit deal for a laundromat. And it's just going to get you to that financial freedom number faster. And so I really encourage people, as I started to go through my transition of business started picking up, I started seeing the benefits of the cash flow. I started seeing how quickly you actually can replace your income. As I'm listening to all these real estate investing podcasts and they're like, replace your income with real estate. I'm like, yes, I'm all on board. And then I started looking, I'm like, what, like $200 a door, maybe? How many? I had to have so many doors in order to replace my income. With the laundromat, I mean, you're looking at 1 to 3 laundromats will replace 99% of America's, W-2 income, right? Like
Mhm.
almost everybody can replace their income in 1 to 3 laundromats. And so it can just happen so much faster. And then you can start to invest in that sort of generational wealth, building the equity, harvesting the tax benefits of real estate, which there's a lot with laundromats too, all those things. So to answer your question is business just started to pick up. I started seeing, okay, this is more in line with what I was hoping for and what I was expecting. And then I started a podcast and I started interviewing people in the industry and seeing, I was like, well, if I want to know what the best people are doing, I should just start asking them. Right. And so that's where the
Mhm.
podcast came in and seeing what other people are doing in this industry. And there's, people are just killing it. So many people are just killing it in this industry sort of quietly and are doing really well and more than replacing their income. And a lot of people come into this business saying, yeah, I want something on the side here on the passive end of the scale. And then they get into the business and then all of a sudden they get excited. This industry is a very cool industry because you can run our business in a lot of different ways, but also laundromats are one of the few places left where communities still gather, right? And a lot of times these are like lower income communities, right? And so you really have an opportunity to make a difference in the community. And that gets addicting too. So yes, you're benefiting from the cash flow of the business, but more the way I've shifted my thinking is I want to help people achieve their financial freedom, but even more than that, I really want to help us as an industry transform communities because I think we have the power to do that. And the fact that most people associate laundromats with like dark and dirty and dingy and
Mhm.
not places you really want to hang out, it really bothers me because I think that communicates to communities like you don't matter, right? And I think we have the opportunity to invest in our businesses in a way that makes us money and helps us achieve that financial freedom that we're looking for ourselves and our families, but also in a way that communicates to a community, you matter, you're important, you're worthy of having a nice business to come to clean your clothes, right? And so, all of that I started seeing as I just kind of stayed in that in that business that I probably should have honestly, financially at least gotten out of a lot earlier, but I'm glad I
Mhm.
didn't because it really opened my eyes to the possibilities of laundromats, both from myself and my families, but also for the communities that we're serving in.
So how many laundromats do you have now?
So it's a funny question, actually. So I have one right now, but I've been sort of, after starting the podcast, and I have a YouTube and a website and stuff. Funny things happen. I'm sure you guys have seen this, right? Funny things happen when you do that, where you start to meet more people. The
Mhm.
world kind of opens up to you a little bit more, and so my vision for what I had for laundromats was just to replace my income, and I really wasn't looking for all that much. I was a pastor, like not
Mhm.
one of those like cool ones on TV that have like private jets and stuff. I was like one of the, normal ones
The
that
broke ones. Yeah.
barely get any money. Right. And so, it really wasn't that much money, but now that I've sort of had this world open up to me and I've been meeting with a lot of people who are interested in this business, specifically who want to get into it, but really don't want to operate a laundromat. And, now basically what I'm trying to say is I have a little fund here and I'm working with people and working to really build a larger portfolio. So my strategy has really shifted and I have been going through a process of actually purging a lot of my like small investments in the industry and looking more to own through the fund kind of going forward and having, larger investments there. So down to one to answer your question in a long way.
Awesome, man. And then out of the resources, I heard the podcast, and then is there a course as well?
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. So, one thing that I have, found is that there really hasn't been a whole lot of places for people to look for information. I mentioned that, in my story, and I was like, listen, I have at least some lessons. So I started a little blog over there, started sharing lessons. Then I was like, man, writing's so hard. I'm just going to start a YouTube channel and then I can just tell people what I know. Right. So I started a YouTube channel, laundromatresource.com, and then Laundromat Resource YouTube channel. And then, like I said, I was like, if I really want to help people, I got to find out what the best people in the industry are doing. So that's where the podcast came in. Right. But then, you can only go over so much on a YouTube video or your podcast, even a long form podcast. Right. And the nitty gritty of like, how do you actually evaluate a laundromat to make sure I know what I'm getting into? You can't really cover, you can cover it like on a high level, but you can't get into the nitty gritty. And there's a lot of little gotchas there. Right. So we did create a course. I am going to talk very highly of it, not because I made it, but because it's the product of my lessons that I learned, very expensive lessons. But it's also, I do a live Q&A every single week and I ask people what questions they have, what they want to go over. So I've been collecting questions from people for a long time. I've been talking, I do consulting. And so I've been talking with literally hundreds of people over the last few years and helping them get into the business. Obviously I've been talking with a lot of people who are doing it really well in the industry already also. And I also am on the brokerage side of laundromats here in California. So all of this stuff I've put into the course that helps you basically, if you want to get into a laundromat in the next 90 days, this is the course for you, because not only does it have all the information you need, but it also comes with access to all the tools you need also to verify the income, the expenses, and to know and understand exactly what you're getting the first time.
Great, Jordan. We'll make sure we get that link and put it in the show notes for our listeners so they can get in there.
Yeah. Well, I can just tell you too, laundromatresource.com/infinite wealth is where that will live.
Awesome. Yeah. Jordan, thanks again, man. This has been awesome. Appreciate it.
Guys, thanks for having me on. I know it started off real heavy, but I appreciate you guys hanging in.
It's like a baby bird at the end, right? Yeah. You flew the coop and are now successful. We're proud of you, man.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, awesome, Jordan. And go make it a fantastic day.
Take care.
Right back at you.